Greetings and salutations, everyone. My name is Andrew Kirchhoff, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today, we're going to be talking about my must-draft wide receivers for the 2021 fantasy football season. On today's episode, we're going to be talking about 4 wide receivers in specific who all have the commonality that they're being drafted within the 4th to 5th rounds of our half PPR fantasy football draft. Now, the reason why I wanted to mention these wide receivers is because though some of them are safe, others are polarizing, and I kind of wanted to have a mix and or a blend of players that you often trust and don't trust based on their performances as of late, and giving you guys the pros and cons of each of them and why I trust all of them to have incredible upside and safety this upcoming season. Again, I talk about opportunity and skill a lot, and I really do believe every single guy that I mentioned today are going to have an ample amount of opportunity and have the skill to back it up, and have already proven in their careers that they can certainly be low-end wide receiver ones, and being drafted in the 4th round is a little bit of a discount. Now, of course, if you're someone like me and you want to draft 2 running backs within your first 3 rounds, getting a wide receiver in the 4th to 5th round, especially a guy that has the upside of being a wide receiver 1, is incredible value. And we want to always be able to invest in guys that can have that longevity and help us win a fantasy football championship. So that's exactly what we're going to do today. We're going to talk about some polarizing players, and we're going to talk about some safe players and their situations and why you should be addressing them and potentially selecting them going into your 2021 fantasy football drafts. Before we begin, I want to take the opportunity to once again thank you guys. Again, the channel is beginning to grow and get to a point where we're really starting to launch off. I know this is the first week of content, but again, I'm not stopping anytime soon. We're making daily fantasy football content here for the entirety of the season. So if you have not subscribed already, make sure you click that subscribe button, click that bell notification button to know when my latest video is up, when I live stream, all of the above. So again, I cannot thank you guys enough for supporting me and clicking that like button, commenting down below. It really does make the world a difference, and without you guys, I wouldn't be here. So thank you once again. All right, let's get into talking about the wide receiver position and my 4 must-draft wide receivers. Though I have limited it to 4, it's mainly due to time. I could literally sit here potentially all day long and talk about fantasy football and wide receivers. But the issue would be, it would take 12 and a half hours to upload a video of that magnitude. And that alone, I don't really have the time for. So as of right now, we'll break it down into 4 wide receivers, giving you guys my perspective, beginning off with Diontae Johnson of the Pittsburgh Steelers. Now, Diontae Johnson is the thumbnail, and the reason why I wanted him there was because, again, like I mentioned, he's quite the polarizing figure because he burnt many fantasy managers last season. Now, the reason why a lot of people are afraid of Diontae Johnson is because of injuries and or dropped passes. And we'll address those, absolutely. But I also want to make sure that we highlight what makes him such a great fantasy prospect going into the 2021 season. Now, last season, when Diontae Johnson played full games and was not injured in halfway through the first quarter and had to leave because of a hamstring injury, in the 12 games that he played fully last season, he averaged 14.05 fantasy points per game on average. That's a great number stat line. I mean, we love that. But the thing that really attracts me towards Diontae Johnson going into 2021 is the amount of opportunity. If in fact Diontae Johnson had done those statistics and had scored 16 touchdowns, yeah, we would expect some regression, maybe not be talking about him today. But because of the fact that he didn't score a boatload of touchdowns, but was still getting incredible opportunity, makes me believe that there's only room to grow for such a young wide receiver going into his 3rd year in the National Football League. Diontae Johnson last season had 11 games of 10-plus targets. Now, that includes the wild card game against the Cleveland Browns, and it only includes games that he played with Ben Roethlisberger because, again, playing with Mason Rudolph isn't going to give us an understanding of what he's capable of going into the future, despite the fact that in that game, he did have a lot of targets regardless. The whole point I'm trying to make is that in the 11 games he played with Ben Roethlisberger, he had 10-plus targets. He averaged 15.96 fantasy points per game. Last season, there were only 2 other wide receivers in the National Football League that had more 10-plus target games than Diontae Johnson. Those 2 players were Keenan Allen and Davante Adams. If you ask me, being associated with the caliber of wide receiver that Keenan Allen and Davante Adams are, in any sort of capacity, regardless of the statistic, that's always great. But the fact that it has to do with double-digit games of double-digit targets last season, that speaks volumes in my opinion. And though, like I've proven, Diontae Johnson, when healthy with Ben Roethlisberger, gets an incredible amount of opportunity and delivers on said opportunity on a weekly basis, a lot of people like to point away from those statistics and like to point towards his dropped passes and assume that, yes, because he dropped passes, he's not relevant and should not be invested in and we can't trust him. When in reality, that that's not going to hold water. That's not something that I believe in, and it's not what the numbers say. Since Diontae Johnson came into the National Football League in 2019, there have been 3 other wide receivers that have dropped more passes than him. And yes, he did lead the league in dropped passes last season with 14, but the 3 other wide receivers that dropped more passes than him in the last 2 seasons are DK Metcalf, Tyreek Hill, and Stephon Diggs. Yet I don't hear anybody talking about them dropping passes. I guess it's just a matter of how you see it. Yes, perhaps the fact that Diontae Johnson was dropping passes on primetime television, Monday Night Football, and it started to, I guess, build from there. But in reality, dropping passes isn't the end-all be-all. The fact that he's getting incredible opportunity, in my opinion, says more than anything in this entire scenario. And that's why I have my trust in Diontae Johnson. That's why I do believe going into our 4th rounds, if he's sitting there and there isn't another wide receiver that you feel more confident in, Diontae Johnson is an investment that I would always like to make. Now, on top of the fact that last season with Ben Roethlisberger, he had 153 targets on 542 routes run. That altogether is a 28.23% target percentage. Now, if you go ahead and just separate it in terms of target share within his own team, because we all know that there's Chase Claypool and Juju Smith. That's the next negative argument. A lot of people like to point towards Claypool and Juju and say that Diontae Johnson won't be able to sustain. There are other guys in this offense that are getting a boatload of targets. With that said, when Diontae Johnson plays and is fully healthy, he is garnering 29.65% of the team's target share. When Claypool did that last season, it was only 16.12%, and Juju Smith 19.74%. Diontae Johnson is outclassing these guys, and at their best, 10+% in terms of total target share. Now, you may be thinking, well, Andrew, this team got Najee Harris. They're going to be running the ball more. He's going to be getting targets. We're going to see a little bit of a decline in terms of total targets throughout the entire offense. I reject that argument as well. I mean, last season, the Steelers, running backs had a total of 80 targets. If you're telling me Najee Harris is going to have more than 80 targets, you might as well start taking him within the top 5. Honestly, because that is an incredible number, and he'll catch 60 of those 80 targets and be a huge fantasy asset. If you want to say that, sure, Claypool maybe gets in more of an advanced role, Juju starts to get a little bit up there in terms of total targets, maybe we can have that argument, but look at what the Steelers have done in the last couple seasons. When Ben Roethlisberger has been in the lineup, they have been amongst the top teams in total passing attempts. In fact, have led the league in total passing attempts in those 2 separate years, 2018 with Big Ben and 2020 with Big Ben. So in an offense that throws the ball, clearly majority of the time and runs 3 wide receiver sets 80% of the time, Diontae Johnson's always going to be on the field. And yes, Claypool and Juju Smith are going to pull targets, but they're also going to pull coverage. Are we going to ignore the fact that Claypool is the deep threat and he's going to be pulling double coverage? And yes, you'll have Juju Smith underneath, but Diontae Johnson is just torching people left, right, and center. I think people forget the fact that targets are not by accident. Targets are not random. Targets are thrown in the direction of a wide receiver because they're getting open. And Diontae Johnson has done that on a consistent basis and has proven to be one of the more talented route runners in the National Football League. And as long as he continues to get open, he's going to find incredible value. On top of that point, when we talk about, Chase Claypool, like I mentioned, he's a deep threat. He's going to be pulling coverage, and that's where his touchdowns came from. Last season, he only had 4 touchdowns in the red zone. So did Diontae Johnson. In fact, Diontae Johnson had 11 targets in 12 games in the red zone last season. Chase Claypool, 13 targets in 14 games. I went ahead and I eliminated the first 2 games of Claypool's season because he didn't have any targets there and he wasn't the full-time starter yet. So I kind of even gave him the benefit of the doubt. Yet they both had the identical amount of targets per game last season and had identical touchdowns in the red zone. Why not go ahead and invest in a guy like Diontae Johnson? Though people like to explain their argument and lean it in a direction where, yeah, he's not going to get targets because there are more weapons, and yeah, he dropped too many passes. Those just don't hold water when we're talking about one of the better route runners in the league that gets open and is being targeted a boatload of times. All in all, I love Diontae Johnson this upcoming season in his 4th round ADP, and I think he's only just going to get better and better as the seasons go on. But we can only talk about him for so long. Let's go ahead and move on to our next running back, which is Chris Godwin. I think Chris Godwin is one of the safer wide receivers. Though he has a polarizing effect on people because of his performance last season, I do think he's an incredible investment. Now, to put it in perspective, last season, Chris Godwin finishes the number 32 overall wide receiver. Mainly because, again, he was injured for a lot of the time. Dealt with a concussion, hamstring injury, broken finger. I mean, that is just an unfortunate turn of events for a guy that finishes the number 2 overall wide receiver in a half PPR scoring format in 2019. Again, he even got an upgrade at the quarterback position in 2020. and wasn't able to take full advantage of it. But when he was able to, in the games that he was healthy and he didn't leave full time, he averaged 14.77 points per game. Those are 10 games. Now, in a full game season, even the games that he left, let's say, for example, he played 75% of it or even 50% of it and left early, he was still averaging 13.2 fantasy points per game in a 12-game season. All in all, Chris Godwin is an extremely talented wide receiver. We saw that in 2019, and since 2019, when he's gotten 7+ targets in a game, he's averaged 18.3 fantasy points. I mean, my goodness, could we ask for anything more from a wide receiver like this? Especially considering the fact that Mike Evans is being drafted ahead of him. You go ahead, let people draft Mike Evans, take the discounted price from Chris Godwin, because again, he did miss time last season. He did burn a lot of people, and perhaps they're going to avoid him because when Chris Godwin was healthy and ready to go from weeks 10 through 17 of last season, he was the number 13 overall wide receiver, and he was the number 14 overall wide receiver in fantasy point average per game. Sure, they're bringing back a lot of talent, and there's a lot of receivers on this team, and maybe too many mouths to feed. You got Gronk, you got Evans, you got Antonio Brown, you brought in Giovanni Bernard on top of the fact that you're already throwing the ball to Leonard Fournette a good amount of times. O.J. Howard returns. There's a lot of talent on this team, but let's talk about what Chris Godwin brings to his team more than anybody else. He's the slot receiver for this team. And when you're a slot receiver associated with Tom Brady, of course you're going to get targets. I mean, it's practically the Edelman-Brady connection. When we take into account the 44 games Tom Brady and Edelman played together from 2016 to 2019 throughout the regular season, Edelman was averaging 9.54 targets per game. If you add into the fact that, again, Tom Brady has more experience in this offense, has more comfort with Byron Leftwich and Bruce Arians to be able to call his own shots and call his own specific plays. I honestly do believe that the slot position is going to be more of a profound target in this offense going into 2020. And this is an offense that isn't shy of throwing the ball. I mean, in just the last 2 seasons, they've been in the top 6 in terms of total passing attempts and have been in the top 3 overall amongst all NFL teams. So of course they're going to throw the ball a bunch. Bruce Arians wants to do that, and that's what their entire key is. And there's a reason why they brought Chris Godwin back, even though he's on the franchise tag. I mean, he's one of the best slot wide receivers, and he's proven that since 2019 with the fact that he's averaged 14.8 yards per reception from within the slot, which is third amongst all wide receivers since 2019, and third for yards per route run with 5.01. Again, there's a lot of talent to be had with a wide receiver like this, and we talk about an offense that's throwing the ball a lot and uses 2 wide receiver sets 96% of the time. Of course, Chris Godwin is going to be on the field. Sure, Antonio Brown is going to get his own, and there are always going to be games in which other wide receivers succeed. But I truly do believe Chris Godwin is a very safe fantasy prospect. He has proven when healthy can produce over the last 2 seasons. And when given opportunity, 7+ times, let him just absolutely dominate and carry your team. That's my perspective as of right now going into the 2021 fantasy football season. We can go ahead and move on to our final 2 prospects. Though you perhaps anticipated them to be separate, I've gone ahead and I've attached Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods to one another. Now, the reason why I'm going ahead and doing this is mainly because they're on the same offense and they're both benefiting from the same variable. Bringing in Matthew Stafford is going to be a huge upside boost for anybody associated with the Los Angeles Rams lineup. Now, Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp, of course, have been the number 1 and 2 wide receiver for this team over the last couple years. In fact, Cooper Kupp finishes the number 4 overall guy in 2019. Robert Woods, as of the last 3 seasons alone, finishes the number 13, number 17, and number 10 overall wide receiver in half PPR. So again, we know they have the upside of being wide receiver 1s. You upgrade the quarterback position. What could potentially hold them back? I mean, when we look at what Robert Woods was able to do last season, he averaged 12.97 fantasy points per game. Great, those are incredible numbers. We take into account that since 2018, he's averaged 13.15 fantasy points per game, which is pretty much almost identical to Cooper Kupp, who since 2018 has averaged 13.16 fantasy points per game. The thing about Cooper Kupp and Robert Woods is that a lot of people view Robert Woods as the safer pick, and I do as well. That's why I wanted to mention him. He doesn't have as much volatility, and he hasn't burnt fantasy managers like Cooper Kupp did last year. Though Cooper Kupp did not have an incredible season last year, mainly due to the fact that he had a lot of touchdown regression and wasn't really able to get himself going in terms of yardage like he had in the past. Let's not forget what he's capable of. I mean, in 2019, the guy had 94 catches for 1,161 yards and 10 receiving touchdowns. He was one of only 2 wide receivers with double-digit touchdowns in 2019, the other one being Kenny Golladay. So again, Cooper Kupp has the upside, and though he's not the biggest target in the world, and he's a guy that should be garnering 25 to 29 red zone targets a season, in conjunction with Matthew Stafford, the sky's the limit, and I'll tell you exactly why. Matthew Stafford last season alone dealt with perhaps some of the most unbelievable scenarios that you could ever paint for a quarterback. I mean, thinking about who his number 2 and number 3 wide receiver were last year, yes, Marvin Jones led the pack because Kenny Golladay was injured for almost the entire season. Go figure, he's already injured again. The fact that Danny Amendola and Quintez Cephas were his number 2 and 3 wide receiver last year, I mean, my goodness, he was working with the bare minimum of talent that you could ever imagine. When you upgrade to the level of what Robert Woods and Cooper Kupp are, you're going to see a little bit of that 2014 to 2017 Matthew Stafford, a guy that with Golden Tate as their stud wide receiver in the slot position was getting over 100 targets, surpassed 1,000 yards twice, got himself a boatload of touchdowns, which will pretty much be what Cooper Kupp is going to play into. And then the number 1 overall wide receiver, which was either Marvin Jones Jr. Or Calvin Johnson, who were eclipsing the marks of over 100 targets, over 1,000 receiving yards, close to double-digit touchdowns. Again, 3 out of the last 4 seasons, Marvin Jones has had 9 total receiving touchdowns. If you go ahead and inject that into the potential of what Robert Woods and or Cooper Kupp can be, again, the sky's the limit for these guys. In a Sean McVay-led offense, yes, we're going to see the team run the ball. We're going to see a lot of targets go to the tight end position, running back position, but the wide receivers are what succeed the most. I mean, when we look at what Sean McVay has implemented to the Los Angeles Rams since coming in 2017, it's all been about 3 wide receiver sets, making the entire offense look identical regardless of what they're running, and using as much play action as possible. When we look at the Detroit Lions after the last couple seasons, have they really had a running game? No. The ability to use play action, especially at the quarterback position, opens up so much. And Matthew Stafford has never been able to take advantage of that in his career. You add in fact that he has a better offensive line this year, a defense that's actually going to be reliable, so he's not having to chase and hunt for points every single time he comes out onto the field. I really do think that Cooper Kupp, Robert Woods have an incredible upside this upcoming season. And though some of you may be hesitant because of their past performances, I think this is a completely different team altogether. The difference between Jared Goff and Matthew Stafford will be evident this year, and it'll be evident in the statistics that these two gentlemen are going to be able to produce. Those are the 4 wide receivers I wanted to mention, my must-draft wide receivers going into the 2021 fantasy football season. Now, though the guys are 4 out of the potential, 15, 16 that I could have mentioned that are going within the 4th, 5th, 6th rounds, I believe this does justice for their arguments and for their potential going into the 2020 season. So again, thank you everybody for watching. I do appreciate you guys supporting. Let me know what you guys think about the wide receivers I mentioned today. Are there any other wide receivers within the 4th round that you believe are must drafts? Again, there are guys like Julio Jones in the 3rd that I'm more than pleased to be able to pick up. And there are also guys that are in the 5th round, like a Brandon Ayuk. What do you guys think of him? Maybe potentially Tyler Lockett falling into the 6th. I want to know your guys' opinion down in the comment section. Let me know. Tomorrow, we will be doing a mock draft for Superflex 2 QB leagues, my favorite format of all time. I'll explain to you guys why exactly you should be playing in a format like that this upcoming season. But regardless, thank you again for watching. Click that like button. Subscribe if you haven't already. And until tomorrow, I'll see you guys. Peace.